Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 11th of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. And we are delighted to say we're going to be joined today by our very own Alex Thomson from Eastern Approaches. And Alex is in fact standing in for David Scott from Northern Exposure, but David Scott is travelling today in Scotland. So it's going to be really excellent to have Alex back. But before we get into the news and a little report on the weather, I'm pleased to say it's just a glorious day here in Plymouth. We've got sunshine and blue skies, everything looking extremely pretty. We understand it's quite bright and chirpy in the Netherlands, a little bit cloudy north of the border, and cool in Essex. So I think that about covers the country. Well, you have some really exceptionally important news to start off with today.
Absolutely. The Mail reporting that George Osborne is to be made a Companion of Honour at Buckingham Palace. Now, I'm not clear what this is for. Obviously, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, so whether this is to do with global trade, perhaps some people allege that Buckingham Palace's contribution to trade is the drugs trade. I don't know, but certainly there are also allegations about George Osborne and certain white powder in Westminster. So whether that's related or not, I'm not quite sure, Brian.
Well, perhaps he's been supplying Coca-Cola into Buckingham Palace to ensure that the party goes with a swing.
Yeah, quite possibly. I wonder what, Alex, have you got any comments on this story?
From all I've heard about George Osborne, Mike, I think it would be more appropriate to call him a maid of honour than a companion of honour. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, you're not giving us any more?
Only that here in Europe, George Osborne has been regarded as an absolute disaster of a chancellor, and it's well known here, as it is in Britain, that he has certain proclivities and certain shortcomings. And the Continentals do like to deride our establishment for rewarding ineptitude, and there's a particular focus on these old Etonians. I have to say they're quite correct. And these, when I was a public school by myself, I have to say it's particularly this Eton and Oxford club that seems to end up getting all the gongs. What do they do for it? I'm really never very sure. Yeah. Perhaps they've actually been rewarded because they've done precisely what they're supposed to do.
I think that's pretty close to it.
I think that's very close to it. Well, before we come back to you again, Alex, just let's have a look at what the BBC's been up to. And of course, the main thing is that the BBC just desperately climbing on top of the let's attract Trump bandwagon. And here we've got classic BBC News gloating that protests against Trump turned violent in Portland, Oregon. Nothing the BBC likes better than to be able to report death, violence and trouble, particularly in other countries, and the US is no exception to that. We've also got this one. They'd retweeted a tweet from Donald Trump himself, just had a very open and successful presidential election. Now professional protesters incited by the media are protesting very unfair. Now, what we noticed is in the comment from the BBC, they just say Mr. Trump criticised the protesters, but indeed he didn't. He was speaking about the protesters incited by the media, and that will of course include the BBC, but the BBC didn't want to talk about that at all.
No, and I'm sure the BBC didn't mention the fact that there's an increasing body of evidence demonstrating that Soros influence at work here, MoveOn.org and Avaz in particular, inciting this activity.
Yeah, and I think we're right in saying that Avaz, if we follow or track back through some of the history of Avaz, we're actually back into the Clinton camp and the Clinton Foundation. So there's some work to be done on that, but as Mike said, Soros there in the background. And I'll just add this one. Here we've got the BBC retweeting an Express headline where Trump is apparently saying, I'll help you, Theresa May, ditch the EU. So from what we see, the BBC lovies are almost writhing on the ground. I think they don't know what to do. They've not done any proper research in all the criminality around the Hillary Clinton. Of course, the BBC doesn't want to mention that subject, child abuse, but here they are lining up to jump on the let's attack Trump bandwagon.
Alex, you wanted to begin with this one from Les Echos, sous le choc.
Yes, it's describing. This is a French business journalist. In fact, he's in the French business paper here, but he is, in fact, a Sorbonne academic specializing in Europe. They don't say much more than that. He, in the headline, is saying that Germany, in a state of shock, asks or wonders about its future role. And if you drill into it, it becomes clear that what it means is Germany's future role as what the article calls the hegemon of Europe.
Right. Well, we've got a quote in a second, but just before I put the quote up, Alex, I just wanted to comment on the state of Angela Merkel there. That she does not look well.
She looks like her skin's turned into kind of saggy orange peel, doesn't she? And I know that unflattering photos are kept in store, at odd moments, snapped just at the right moment, just for illustrations of when a politician is supposedly not happy with something. But this is more than just a quick moment. She's aged a lot more than other world leaders in the same period, I think.
Yes. Well, let's have a look at the quote then. Excuse me. The third effect, talking about Trump's victory, is that now that its allies are threatening to retreat into themselves, Germany, already suspected of hegemonic designs in Europe, feels itself called upon to play an even more significant role. Wolf-Schmeise, political correspondent of TV station ZDF, has opined Germany must now apply itself to tackling huge challenges.
Yes, and it's up to the French really to report this, because obviously since 1870, let's not forget that's the first time the Prussians invaded France, they have been rolled over by the German wagon 3 times. They only stopped it the second of those times in the First World War with huge, massive sacrifices at Verdun. And so they've always decided since then not to lie down, as it were, in front of the Germans, but to keep abreast of German desires and humour them. So they're very alert to what's being said. And here, this guy, who's the ZDF TV correspondent, has opined. And when ZDF speaks, it is the government, by the way. He says that Germany must now become even more of a bossy boots in Europe. And when ZDF speaks, they've just less than 2 years ago gone over to a model of universal general taxation funding. So there is, just like with the all the other obligatory taxes, if you don't pay your special broadcasting tax, which goes only to ARD and ZDF, two channels equivalent to the BBC, then you can be fined and jailed. So that's how they're funded, because, of course, their viewership is collapsing as it is with states broadcasters over the Western world. And ZDF, just a few months ago, in the height of this year's migrant crisis, openly acknowledged that, I think, the level of the number 2 of ZDF, yes, we get our orders from Mrs. Merkel's office. They tell us what they want reporting and what spin they want put on things. So they're quite transparent about this. When ZDF speaks, it's Merkel speaking.
And ZDF spoke for Trump?
Yes, just look at the carefully composed shot here. I went and had a look at this Schmeise, this correspondent of ZDF, to see what he had been reporting about Herr Trump. I deliberately not been looking at the deadwood journalist across Europe in the run-up to the election because it annoys you, something rotten. But I thought after this I had to go and check what he'd been saying. I couldn't track down his quote in a text form, but he seems to have said it in a video, perhaps this one. But here he's characterizing, or his media team around him is characterizing the Trump voter, der Trump-Wähler, as white, male, and conservative. 3 apparently very nasty things to be. And here's a carefully composed shot showing only old geezers from the out in the sticks. Well, we'll get on to election stats soon, but that, of course, is a lazy stereotype, and it's been less true in this election than the Republican voting bloc in previous elections.
Well, Alex, what has been staggering me over the last couple of days are the parallels in the media rhetoric between the Trump victory and Brexit. And so yesterday on the BBC, for example, they were absolutely pushing the idea that it was the less well-educated, the working class, the poorer that were voting for Trump. This is the same kind of rhetoric that gave the excuse in the mainstream press, at least, for the Brexit result. But you wanted to highlight this particular graph. I can't remember where this came from.
Now, this has just been doing the rounds online, but it's just someone's attempt shared on Facebook to put well-known statistics into graphical form, and the usual caveat applies that it's not zeroed on the x-axis. This is just the peak of the two for comparison. So if you go down to 0, the bars are actually more comparable in height. But look at what's happened here. the Republican electoral base has been a constant turnout of 60 million for the last 3 elections. That's Obama 1, Obama 2, and Trump elections. What's happened to the Democrat vote? 70 million, with a small margin of error, when Obama won, was elected. That is because he mobilized, for example, 95% of black voters. And then what happened in Obama 2, 5 million of those, largely the blacks and other ethnic minorities, stayed away because they were disillusioned. And this time, even other kinds of Democrat voters could not stomach voting for the candidate whom their party had foisted upon them, because the Clintons controlled the money. The Clintons, of course, were very annoyed, or that's an understatement, as everything is with the Clintons, that Obama had the chutzpah to get his candidacy, because the agreement as far back as 2000 had been, okay, well, Bush is going to get it, but the next time the Democrats have a fair pop, then it's going to be Hillary, right? You'll remember back as far as when Bill was on his way out of the White House, that was the idea. But Obama had his own Chicago machine and interposed himself and rode this wave of, yes, we can. And the African Americans particularly went for it, and others. And they stayed away. So that, in fact, 1.3 million, I upbraided Dennis McShane about this on Twitter this morning, because he was going along with this white working class stereotype, calling everyone racists. 1.3 million fewer people voted for Trump than voted for the previous very centrist Republican candidate, Mitt Romney. What's happened is the Democrat vote has collapsed because of the candidature of Hillary Clinton.
Right, well, and that's very interesting. And then you commented on this on your Facebook page, Alex. This was a map from Infowars, I believe. We can just...
You can also find it through my Twitter, because I mirror onto Twitter anything I write on Facebook. Longer comments can't go on Twitter. Okay, fair enough. It's Alex Jones's outlet, Infowars. Not everyone's cup of tea, even in the alternative media movement. But still, look at this. This is county by county. And you can see that even the state-by-state results of the Electoral College is not really an accurate reflection of what's going on in the US. Instead, you've got 60 million Hillary Clinton voters, a few of whom, okay, are buried in the sea of the middle of America, but most of them, shall we say 40 to 50 million of them, are in the urban strips along only the western coastal edge of the western states and the eastern edge of, it's the whole corridor, isn't it, from Vermont right down to Louisiana through a narrow strip of urbanization. And that is where Hillary's 60 million electors, or most of them, live, and in a couple of other Hispanic and mixed areas in the Midwest, or further west in the Midwest. The whole of the rest of America, wherever there are farms, every county has voted for Trump. And in fact, there are states, I found a couple, Oklahoma and I think, Kansas was all but 2 counties. Tennessee was all but 2 counties voting for Trump. This is absolutely unprecedented. There is no Democrat vote this time in many parts of America, even where people are poor.
Yeah, and you wanted to compare that with the Brexit map?
Yes, because as usual, this has been doing the rounds on Twitter, and I hope people have seen it. But if you've not, the yellow and blue seems to have been the general code people went for in Brexit, and this is why the Continentals, by the way, lump these movements together and write them both off as, angry, aged, poor white people in Anglo-Saxon countries having their last hurrah against the globalists. But look at what's going on here. It is a similar social phenomenon in a way. If you just go by constituencies that voted yes and no, famously every constituency in Scotland returned a yes majority, with some doubt about Murray, which was almost 50-50. And in the west of Northern Ireland, the Catholic rural west of Northern Ireland, very strongly Remain. And then the nationalist west of Wales, and then, of course, the well-to-do south centre of England. But if you then drill down onto the right-hand side and see that's not meant to overlap in colour, it's just a coincidence they've chosen blue. It could be any colour. It's the light versus dark on the right. That's the real Brexit map. Where was the absolute no, never leave the EU vote? It was only in the Scottish Central Belt, the far west of Northern Ireland. It wasn't even a national trend in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And even within London, it was only a couple of boroughs of the likes of Islington where it was overwhelming. The rest of the country was pretty united in saying, statistically, from about 40 to 70%, no, we do not want the European Union anymore. That's a far more intelligent way of looking at it. So you've got in both cases these urban islands of people cut off, as it were, from reality. They don't make anything. Their lives are comfortable. They're often dependent on taxpayer-funded jobs or welfare. And in the UK, we have this additional aspect of small parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland where, fairy tale early 20th century nationalism still holds sway. And that's really the situation. The country whether it's the UK or the US, is not really divided down the middle. It's just that you have pockets of concentrated fairy tale people.
Yeah. Alex, many people believe that there was rigging that went on with the vote for Brexit here in UK. I personally believe that, and for the States, the same thing was being said, and then we had Mr. Soros, of course, acting behind the whole voting procedure for this US election, and then many people pointing fingers at the companies controlling the electronic voting system. But what we're perhaps starting to understand is that the swing was just so massive that you couldn't really fiddle the vote, because if you did it, it was going to become so obvious. So do you think there's some truth in that, or is that just a sort of story circulating?
I think there is a lot of truth in it. The one thing that I haven't got to the bottom of with the stuff that came out via InfoWars, although they're independent people who whistleblew on it, that their claims seem robust, but they were talking about the fraction magic, right? So that voters are logged in the system as having voted, if need be, to massage the figures only for 0.2% of a candidate, 0.2 of a vote, and those figures, the decimals, don't appear by default. It's a look into fraction magic. I can believe that, but I don't understand quite how the statistics or the totting up work. But I do think there is a lot of truth in that. Notoriously, for the last few elections, the Democrats were the main culprits, but Republicans have done it too over the years, sending men in vans round. The Eastern Europeans call it the carousel. Sinn Féin called it vote early, vote often. And these gentlemen have got multiple IDs, from real birth certificates, and they go around from polling station to polling station. This time, because the alternative media was so alert to it, as one person put it, they could only vote in an average of 2 polling stations a day instead of 10. So that's another reason, I think, to explain that, even that 60 million popular vote for Hillary Clinton may have been up to a quarter massaged. I think her real vote is a lot lower than that, because there aren't 60 million people in those narrow coastal strips I showed you.
Yeah.
I think, Alex, I'm interested in your comments on this. As I say, if we look at the way the media is behaving on both sides of the Atlantic with regard to Brexit and Trump, the danger here, I think, is one of divide and conquer, of division. It's all about division and fear. And the way that the media in this country is playing the fear card over Trump, just as they did with Brexit, but it seems to be even more intense with Trump. It's incredible, and I'm seeing stories of suggestions that California is talking about secession from the union now and all this kind of stuff. We mentioned on this program a week or two ago that Devon and Cornwall police are exercising for civil unrest, and it looks to me like I've seen other comments from mainstream commentators saying that people are going to regret taking a stand on Brexit, and they're going to regret taking a stand on Trump, and it was almost like a threat. And it seems to me that the establishment, the governments on both sides of the Atlantic are prepared for this. They are going to incite as much trouble as they can possibly incite. They want chaos, and they want to deal with the chaos in the way that they know best how to deal with it, and that is to shut it down firmly. Really, we've got to make sure we don't fall into that trap.
Absolutely agree, Mike. It's clear that there is a two-pronged attack now from the same global financial institutions against both Brexit and Trump. They realised at some point about 3 months out of each vote that they were not going to be able to stop them, because there was just going to have to be too much massaging of the vote, and it would be too obvious in an alert age like ours with the digital ability we have to share tactics on avoiding fraud. So instead they have decided to let both Brexit and Trump go through as a vote. And then the two prongs of squashing it are A, financial and economic collapse, because they hold the reins of those abilities, of course, which they will then blame on the stupid Anglo-Saxon population of both countries. And B is the agitation, the Soros type stuff. I mean, Craigslist in the US cases, where a lot of people look for casual work, and in cities like Philadelphia, there's a lot of adverts going out now, and I think the same is happening more subtly in Britain, perhaps through mouth-to-mouth or face-to-face contact, that people are saying, hey, you can get good money for rioting, hourly rates payable, transport laid on. So those two prongs are going to happen. The problem is that, as usual, we mustn't overestimate the world awareness of any of these Soros sites. They're not aware of what the little people do or where they live. They don't have geography and statistics and so on in their head. They don't know history. And so they're assuming that they can inflame entire states of the US or counties and cities in Britain. They can't. There's very, very small pockets geographically where any number of people could be persuaded to riot. And I'm quite hopeful that if these things happened, particularly in the internet age, people would understand quickly what was happening and they would be contained, and these people would only be fouling their own nest in their own slum areas. And of course, they need to be shown compassion and educated.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, just before we move on from this subject, I just want to highlight this. I saw this has been tweeted out in a number of different sources today. Manisha Rajesh, who seems to be a travel correspondent for The Telegraph in the past, currently for The Guardian, tweeting this out. It's about time for a presidential assassination. Absolutely incredible comment from any mainstream journalist. Strangely enough, or perhaps not, the page, her Twitter page, no longer exists. Now, I don't know whether that's because Twitter shut her down as a result of that comment, or whether she thought it was sensible to close her page. But you know, Brian, where are we getting to if mainstream journalists are pushing this type of stuff out?
Well, Mike, I think we've been seeing the change in journalists over a great many years. They're not independent. They're not doing independent research. They come in with an absolutely preordained political agenda, which they then write into their articles. We know they're being reframed. Guardian, of course, a big supporter of common purpose. Don't know whether this lady's common purpose or not. But then we're seeing people whose personalities, I think, have changed, because what normal woman would make a comment like that? This to me is somebody who's got sort of raging anger inside them. They look very pleasant and calm and ordinary, but inside their head something remarkable's going on, and it's been put there.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
Well, here's another remarkable article, again from The Guardian. Facebook's failure. Did fake news and polarized politics get Trump elected? And the subheadline says, the company is being accused of abdicating its responsibility to clamp down on fake news stories and counter the echo chamber that defined this election. So as you read down through the article, they're talking about the fake news and misinformation that has plagued the 2016 election on an unprecedented scale. Much of that fake news, of course, if there has been any, has been coming from government sources, and it's been pumped into Facebook in order to try to confuse and try to drive people's opinions. But nonetheless, they're criticizing Facebook for it, and they're suggesting, and this is The Guardian speaking here, they're suggesting that Facebook should have done something to censor what they describe as fake news. And of course, this is a pretty dangerous precedent.
What they're really talking about, Mike, is the fact that alternative media sources, ordinary people, have done absolutely great research, putting information together around largely the Clintons, because that's where most of the hard-hitting stuff was coming out. And of course, people were also reporting highly factual information, like the congressional investigation into Benghazi, where they were putting out in a much wider alternative audience the real facts coming out in that inquiry, whether it was to do with Hillary Clinton lying or people dying in the embassy over there. So mainstream news was not reporting what Congress was saying, but ordinary people were. And that's what I think they are now trying to label as, inverted commas, fake news.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of this is, of course, The Guardian suffering financially at the moment from collapsing readerships and collapsing income. They've started a new membership drive to try and get people to give them money. If you just look down through the article, there's pointing out that the Pew Research Center has found that 44% of Americans get their news from Facebook. So that's 44% of Americans that are not going to mainstream news channels for their news, and of course that has an impact on incomes for ad revenue and other revenues. And then they highlight other research saying that there's a lag of around 13 hours between the publication of a so-called false report and a subsequent debunking by the mainstream media, and that's enough time for the story to be read by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So they're really worried.
They're panicking.
They're panicking about income. They're panicking about the fact they can't react fast enough. And I believe, Brian and Alex, maybe you've got something that you could add to this. Part of this reaction is because, of course, one of their intelligence gathering sections on their website has been the comments section, and the comments section, as Vanessa Beeley has pointed out recently, they've had to do some pretty massive censorship on their comments section.
Because people are now attacking the papers because they know what they're reporting is false.
Absolutely.
But I'll just add in there, but we've got to remember, of course, where does The Guardian get revenue from? Government posts, government adverts for jobs, big source of revenue, and also they've got the Scott Trust sitting behind them with a group of, I would say, extremely questionable people helping to run this newspaper, which then claims it's independent, but of course is nothing of the sort. This is a Guardian. This is a government Guardian we're talking about. And if we look at the Guardian's role in helping to promote big society and social capital companies which are running government agenda, this is a paper which is propaganda.
Absolutely. Just briefly, Alex, any thoughts?
If you go to YouTube and look for a piece called MSNBC Realize They Are Propagandists, you will see just that discussion with the classic bubble, coastal liberals who live in a bubble, basically, saying the morning after, how did it get to this? And one of them says, well, we were cracking down very hard on any of our own number who even dared to suggest Hillary Clinton's likelihood of winning was below 90%. So you've got Soviet levels of self-containment in this privileged elite, and it's very dangerous for any of them to break cover. So, of course, their stomachs turn when they read Facebook comments or comments below Guardian articles. Guardian commentators, by the way, without becoming in any sense right-wing, have turned right against the Guardian line on a number of social and economic issues just in the past 6 months. So I think a lot of them knew what was going on. There's indications that some Guardian journalists were consuming InfoWars, possibly even UK column, on a regular basis, if only because their bosses had told them they had to rebut everything that we said.
Yeah. Well, we'll just come back on the subject of the BBC. So BBC, of course, delighted to help stir up angst, anything to do with Brexit. And here we are, MPs ready to vote against triggering Brexit. It should say crows the BBC News. But it's same old, really. Anywhere there's strife and division or the potential of that in the country, the BBC's there.
Right. And speaking of Brexit, this is a report, a German report. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, Alex.
Sachverständigenrat.
Okay, thank you. And the quote here says, what is striking about how the balance of net national income has developed since 2011, the decline in this accounts on its own for a drop of more than 3% of GDP. In economic terms, what this reflects is the relative growth in income payable to foreigners arising from their investment activities in the United Kingdom. The balance of trade reflects this development. The UK has been a net importer of capital since the 1990s. Who's published this?
This is the German Panel of Economic Experts, one of these ponderous titles that they have in Germany. And they, every November, publish this Sachverständigenrat report on the economic wise men's prognosis for the year. And this year, the whole of Chapter 4, which is a PDF on its own, as you can see, has been devoted to the ramifications of Brexit for the German economy, which the German great and good are really stroking their chins about. Largely because if they don't get automatic access to our market, if the single market negotiations break down, then they're not going to be able to shift their cars and machinery to us, which of course is what Farage has quite rightly been saying, and not just him, for a long time. So their point here is that here's the snideness coming in, and the next piece on from France will say the same thing, that they they're saying these stupid British are shooting themselves in the foot because they at least quote the information accurately. That Britain actually is dependent on foreign investors now. So obviously, if a British company or a company working in Britain does well, its profits are creamed off. Particularly, this is the case with Gulf and Hong Kong investors buying real estate, even whole student cities, blocks of flats anywhere remotely near London or Manchester, because it's a sure investment, and that money is going back to the Asian tycoons, of course. You can't blame them. They've got the legal ability to do it. It's not like Eastern Europe where foreign ownership of land is prohibited. And the same is true of the other businesses we run. So the Germans are quite rightly saying, why would the British do this? They don't quite understand our spirit, but their economics is sound. We don't actually have any capital anymore. Britain, which together with the Netherlands pioneered financial capitalism, the model where you have the money rather than the idea and you pour that in, no longer has any capital, or has its government or a clique within the government has conspired that is no longer the way to do things. It's strange, isn't it? Because at the same time, Britain is still, I think, the largest financial foreign direct investor in the United States and very high up the chain on some other countries like India. So there's people based in Britain who in the figures are investing in companies seriously, but they're investing overseas.
Indeed. And we did mention earlier the fact that the sort of veiled threats in some of the media coverage. This is Les Echo again. And British friends are not allowed to rejoice, apparently.
Yes, because this writer, and pardon me, this one is the Sorbonne academic, not the previous French author I mentioned. This Sorbonne academic, who claims to be an expert on all things European, says the British seem to have got miraculously well through the first 100 days since voting to leave the EU, but they should not rejoice too soon. And his only point for that seems to be that if we have the reintroduction of tariffs, WTO rules, the base that we might have to revert to, if there's tariffs with our financial services going abroad and the Continental's goods coming into Britain, then apparently a lot of companies will up sticks and leave. Presumably the financial and service economy tailored ones to English-speaking enclaves on the continent or to Ireland, for example. And he says, well, the only way that Britain could ever cope with this would be a commensurate drop in its corporate tax rate, as if this was the worst thing in the world, because, of course, the continental economies now are predicated on stealing a quarter of their company's profits, in tax. So it's unimaginable, particularly in France with its legendary punitive tax regimes, that Britain could ever do, what it used to do in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries and let companies keep their profits. You can see the kind of blinkered thinking which is coming in, but it encapsulates how the French, Germans, even the Dutch, who are more pragmatic, are starting to think about Britain. They're thinking that we haven't a hope in hell of getting through this if we really do leave the European Union and stand on our own economically. And the reason for that is they think correctly we don't have much money around at the moment. And secondly, they think we just don't have the gumption to be competitive and let useless companies fail and good ones price their way into the market.
Yeah. Yes, okay. Well, let's move on to European military then. And Jean-Claude Juncker, one of the EU presidents, mentioning it again.
Yes, I couldn't find the original quote. Juncker usually speaks in French, but being a Luxembourger, he's fluent in German. But there's a quote here where he's demanding European armed forces. I don't know whether you have the quote to hand.
I don't, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, it wasn't particularly necessary because it was only a German translation I could find. But his words were basically the Americans, he grudgingly says, yes, they've done a lot for us in the past. We're very grateful. But of course, he says they're totally lost interest in, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but the tone was, they've lost interest in defending the Europeans. And of course, he means on the day after Trump, because he speaks every year on the 9th of November anyway, because it's the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. He gives a kind of State of Europe address. And this year, his theme was, and it was ideal for him that Trump had been elected the day before, he said, well, of course, the Americans are completely going to lose interest in NATO. And so with the Brits gone, we've got no excuse at all. We must thunder ahead towards the European Defence Union and progress the Defence Union to the point where it really is European armed forces.
Yes. Well, who's this now? This is
Fallon.
Fallon, yes, sorry, thank you, Brian. The UK and Norway apparently has agreed cooperation on maritime patrol aircraft with the Norwegians. So this is a new international defence pact.
Well, Well, it has to be, doesn't it? Because it had to happen because we don't have any maritime patrol aircraft because David Cameron scrapped them all. So now we need to create a special pact with the Norwegians so we can borrow their aircraft.
Absolutely. So here he is, Fallon in Norway, close to the Arctic Circle yesterday. And we're going to work closer on this cooperation. We're going to procure 9 Boeing P-8 MPAs as a result of the Strategic Defence and Security Review. And this new capability is going to be based in Scotland. And you said, well, that's interesting because we're going to give Scotland to Norway in some time in the future.
Well,
anyway.
there has been an EU document which circulated some time ago, which rather suggested that the Scandinavian countries were going to be given chunks of Scotland.
Right, okay. And he also visited Bode Men Air Station, which is home of 2 F-16 squadrons. So he's been travelling around Norway making this agreement. I don't recall it being debated in Parliament, but then there you go. But what else has he been up to? Well, apparently he's saying that we remain committed to working with regional allies to confront global security threats. We've got cooperation happening with the French, with a 50-year pact, as we know now, with Denmark, with other countries. Well, what did he have to say? We will work harder for our alliances and our partnerships when we leave the EU because we are committed to the defence of our continent. I didn't know Europe was Michael Fallon's continent. I'm glad I now know whose it is. And he said that's why we're moving troops to the NATO mission in Estonia, accompanied to Poland, and RAF Typhoon fighters to the Black Sea.
Yeah. This is very dangerous and cynical stuff, Mike, because, of course, what it is saying is that we do not have the military capability. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in little clusters of British troops into the training organisations of other countries, and that is going to be the route for controlling the military in those countries. You can just see this unfolding. Let's add a bit to this by jumping to Press TV. A good report. So let's talk about it. UK inaugurates massive military base in Bahrain, and this is your point exactly, Mike. No debate in British Parliament about this, but all of a sudden we're going to open up a vast naval support facility, which Mr. Fallon is saying it's going to be the biggest centre of operations for the Royal Navy after Portsmouth. So never mind the fact there's been no debate in Westminster, we're going to set up a base in Bahrain. That's where all the money will go. The local Bahraini infrastructure will benefit from this base. Meanwhile, we're going to show you in a minute what's happening with Ministry of Defence infrastructure in UK. There's going to be 600 military there and warships. Well, we don't know how many warships, of course, because Britain's latest Type 45 warships don't like warm water. So they're having a little bit of trouble in Bahrain because apparently the Navy has just discovered the water is warm out there, Mike. And the RAF is already there and has been for some time. And then Press TV added a little bit, of course, which is that $55 million of British arms have actually been sold into Bahrain since 2011. So no discussion in Parliament. Mr. Fallon and others behind closed doors simply decide we're going to spend multi-millions for British military base in Bahrain. And this is what he's doing at the same time as that effort goes into Bahrain. The little inset there also from Press TV, UK to sell off military lands for housing purposes. So this is housing, which in my opinion is being provided because they know in Brexit light, there's still going to be massive immigration from the Commonwealth back into UK. And there's going to be no investment in jobs and the infrastructure in UK. Meanwhile, in Syria, the Russians are saying that they've now managed to move into some of the terrorist areas where they're discovering weapon systems which are using chlorine and white phosphorus. And the report here from TASS is saying that troops have found evidence of chemical weapons used against Syrian government troops and civilians in the southwest of Syria's Aleppo. And this, of course, is exactly what Vanessa Beeley has been pointing out. Absolute propaganda and lies coming from Western media who simply continue to press the same rhetoric. And I suppose we better say that we haven't forgotten that former Conservative MP Brooks Newmark said in a conversation with us on the telephone that it was proven that Assad had used chemical weapons. When we asked Brooks Newmark for the evidence, he was unable to provide it.
And sticking with Syria, then the White House, U.S. Department of the Treasury has designated some more people as being al-Nusra Front leaders, including al-Muhsini, and we have mentioned this man on UK Column News before with Vanessa Beeley. He's head of one of the main terrorist groups, the Army of Conquest Coalition in Syria, and of course he was linked to one of the interviewers of the White Helmets that was related to the London Fire Brigade visit and so on. So there are connections through, but let's look at one other tweet that's been put out today highlighting certain connections to this man. So the US have designated Mr. al-Muhsini as a terrorist, and here he is with a gentleman called Hadi, and there's Hadi with somebody called Kennan and Hillary together. So the connections are
extraordinary, really, aren't they?
Yes, not quite sure what to think of that. So anyway, the point in this tweet is, with such friends, are you not relieved? And he, of course, is referring to the fact that Trump won and that Hillary didn't. So,
yeah.
Yes.
Alex, would you just, any comment you like on Syria and what's happening or likely to happen?
I think that if you look at various European countries, the awareness that we have reached now in Britain and America is still not there, and so you're going to find naive continental countries, particularly Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands. Okay, the Dutch are a bit more awake; they read more English, but that these nations with niche but not to be sniffed at military capabilities, like heavy lift, for example, or certain kinds of close combat and support, they are continually going to be drafted in, so that the it's not even the US really, it's a conglomerate of interests based in the US, which is attacking Syria, will still be able to claim that there is a coalition. The other factor, which I see particularly from the continent, is large numbers of these Syrian and Iraqi, very healthy males, shall we say, are now washing around Europe, and that they're not best liked. They tend to bump into you and say, where train, where government office? They don't know thank you. And they're pretty intimidating even to someone like me. So to a little old lady or a girl, I'm sure they're 10 times more so. So it's being exported. And Britain has a bit of protection because of, as the old song says, thank God we're surrounded by water. Well, that was an Irish song originally. It's true of us as well, and we're not in the Schengen zone. But right up to the Channel, here in Holland and in France, you can see a lot of this Syrian spillover, because once they're into Turkey and Greece, that's it, no controls, no checks. So Syria is, should we say that Europe is being Syrianized more readily than Syria is being Europeanized?
Okay. Well, what is the solution? We're going to say, as we have been saying now for several weeks, the solution is people coming together, exposing what is really going on, talking about what's really going on, and then getting out there and winning over other people. So so we still do have tickets and places available for the British Constitution Group event, the conference in Winchester on November the 19th. That's just an illustrative picture there of Mr. Fallon. We will be talking about him and indeed treason by other British politicians. If you haven't visited the British Constitution Group website, suggest you go and have a look, base for the group itself. And I'm not able to give you the exact figures, but I can tell you that we've had a lot more donations come in for the Doherty family. We're well over £3,000. This is really an astonishing response, and we're very, very grateful. And it is going to allow us to do some very good work with the Dohertys. But as I have said before, I'm not able to give too much information at the moment. until the docketies are in a location which is safe and communications can be improved. But there will be more in due course. And I'm also going to pop up this again. People still having trouble making a donation. I will explain it once again. If you go to the UK Column website and look for the donate box, if you follow the PayPal menus through to the last page, where you simply say, yes, this is the donation I want to make, on the last PayPal page, there will be a little box where you can put special instructions, put in Doherty or something appropriate for the Doherty family, and then send your donation. But you have to follow through the PayPal menu until the final page, where you will get a little drop-down menu. So hopefully that'll make life easier for people who would still like to donate. Well, back to the BBC, and a fascinating little report. The BBC's crowing that Virgin Trains are going to be doubling the number of ex-offenders that they employ. Now, we are all for getting ex-offenders into employment, but we have also been very, very concerned about who has been getting in to train people in prison, because we think there's another agenda. And my question is, why do we need prisoners to be trained in future leadership? What am I talking about? Well, let's bring in our old friend Common Purpose, and I'll do this very quickly because I have a little section here. But this is just some of the evidence that this pernicious political charity Common Purpose, in amongst the prison and offending system, this is actually to do with meetings taking place in Northern Ireland. We had some gentlemen from the Northern Ireland Probation Service and the Northern Ireland Sex Offender Strategic Management Team. And in their report from 2006, they were boasting that they're working with Common Purpose both through the Matrix course and Your Turn, which was Common Purpose targeting 13 to 15-year-olds. The very same Common Purpose, of course, that was training youngsters in UK without appropriate SRB checks. But let's have a look a bit more at the sort of thing they get up to. This was Hull Prison that had to apologise because they breached data protection rules to release names of people who'd asked about how much the prison had spent on Common Purpose. Notice the letter is unsigned, so this was how it was sent out. And then if we get into other material, this is basically warnings that people were asking for information about how much public money was being spent on Common Purpose. You can freeze the screen and have a look at this yourself. But this is Common Purpose saying we have no information about council spending decisions. This is a complete lie by Common Purpose. And here, if we come in another area, we've got Common Purpose communicating with Leeds City Council, in which there is a whole letter dedicated to how Common Purpose has actually been given set money, ring-fence money from the public budget through Leeds Council Education Department. So lie upon lie for anything we see concerning Common Purpose. This was a local Plymouth City councillor. An email was sent to him by Common Purpose saying they were holding that should be a Your Turn workshop between 9 and 1 o'clock. On the 12th of May at Plymouth High School for Girls, and Common Purpose is saying they'd be very grateful if you could please help us by recommending an advisor to take place. So in his work time, the gentleman concerned, Mr. Plum, sent through an email, and he said to colleagues, I can't do this without completely reorganising my diary, so is anyone interested? Our point in showing this is here was a man being paid to do his public job. What is he doing instead? Using his time to promote the political charity Common Purpose. And we've got another one here. This is Jim Carr, the chief executive from Preston City Council, and he wrote to colleagues saying, well, we've done really well because our efforts have allowed 1/3 of the Common Purpose Advisory Group to be recruited. Our efforts helped recruit 1/3 of the Common Purpose Advisory Group. So here was another civil servant using his time to promote a political charity. And then let's not forget that Common Purpose, of course, was heavily embedded in the Labour administration through the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister with John Prescott. But at the same time, if we come more up to date, here's Common Purpose being praised by David Cameron, and David Cameron was particularly interested to help promote Common Purpose in India. So this is pretty serious stuff. What is this charity actually up to?
And we shouldn't forget the £40 million of Common Purpose related money just mentioned that I mentioned on the programme on Wednesday. So central government money going straight into this type of leadership training, Common Purpose related leadership training.
Common Purpose leadership training with a course applied psychology, reframing the people it touches.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for the Common Purpose, then this was kindly sent in to us today. Do have a look at the website yourself. It's the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. It's talking about leadership in healthcare, particularly in America, but it's also saying we need to follow the Common Purpose. And if you go to the particular website, here it is, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the opening page, big graphic, our Common Purpose. And let's remember, of course, that the Chief Executive for Common Purpose, Julia Middleton, boasted early on that she'd been in America. She didn't say who she'd been working with, but she'd been in America when she said she mysteriously got the idea for Common Purpose. And with no time at all, powerful international banks, including Deutsche Bank, had given millions of pounds to help push this political charity into the heart of British society. Dangerous stuff, Mike. So we have Virgin Trains. We also have Virgin Healthcare, I think.
Well, yes, just briefly, Virgin Healthcare. Of course, we're not privatising the NHS in any way, Brian.
Well, we're not, because Gary Streeter, Conservative MP, has said that we're not.
Yes,
no?
Indeed.
Yeah.
But they've been awarded a £700 million contract to run 200 NHS services to do with adult social care. This is Bath and North East Somerset. So this is Virgin Health is becoming the largest private healthcare provider rapidly in this country. And it's soon not going to be the National Health Service, it's going to be the Virgin Health Service.
No, you can't be right. Gary Streeter has specifically said that it's mere conspiracy theory to even suggest that the NHS is being privatised. So I can't believe that this report from the Times can be true.
No.
Okay.
Well, okay. Shall we leave it there?
I think we better.
Yeah. Okay. Are we
Did
going
you
on,
mean
or
that
do
article,
yeah,
the news?
Yes.
We're going to have a live discussion.
Yes.
I think we might as well just finish the last couple of bits, because this article is shocking.
Well, it is pretty shocking. This is Nicola Sturgeon. I'm sorry David Scott isn't here today to cover this, because Nicola Sturgeon, with European funding, EU funding, is now promoting gender neutrality to children as young as 2. So basically this is therefore not about what people may feel about their gender. This is about encouraging children to feel a particular way about gender and gender identity. So this is a joint project by the Scottish Government and the EU, and they are creating what they're calling Gendersaurus Rex. It is a way to promote this to children. You can see the picture of it there just at the bottom of the screen. How do we talk about the queerness outside of sexuality? How do we talk about sexuality and children in the same breath without being accused of summoning the spectre of paedophilia? Their creative learning programme works in partnership with schools, local authorities and Education Scotland to support pupils, teachers and other educators' creative development. And what's interesting about this is that they say specifically that they are targeting, well, what they say is they look at children in particular who identify as being the sex they were born with, the physical sex that they were born with, and they will focus on them because they might be feeling oppressed
Yeah, so the children who've got a strong identity of who and what they are, albeit at that early age, they're going to be targeted.
Absolutely.
And I think we know what's going to go. Alex, very quick comment for you, and we're just going to end on the subject of, we will then end on the subject of remembrance. What's your feeling on this?
There's nothing to compare with that on the continent, although there are a couple of countries like Germany where it is absolutely obligatory, even for religious schools, to show every sexual image that the government puts in its curriculum. And there are inspectors that go around Germany to these schools run by nuns or whatever, saying, show us that you haven't ripped out any pages where we show graphic bits. And so that the Continentals are edging towards this, but I think Scotland, well, ultimately, it's some think tanks in America are leading the way on this, and Scotland is being used, as in so many other ways, as a social policy test bed for the idea of degendering the whole of society. And if it works there, David Scott would always say if he was here, it's because of the largely complacent, passive population. Then it will be rolled out to other Western countries. So now is the time to stop it.
Okay. Alex, thank you very much for that. And I'm just going to end on the subject. We have Remembrance Sunday coming up. Sorry, there we are. We are not wearing poppies, and I'm going to make the statement that while we do clearly remember those that have made the ultimate sacrifice for this country, we now see that what is happening around Britain's charity industry, we simply cannot condone it anymore. And because this was reported in the last few days, others may have already seen this, but here was the gloating over blood-sweat lands and a sea of red. But now what the Herald and other newspapers are exposing is that out of the millions that came in for this, I think, obscene
so-called art installation. Less than a third of the money has gone to charities, including the British Legion. And well, who's been benefiting from it? Well, there was a finance company. I've got them up on screen. Apologies, B and Y, but you'll see it on screen. I can't focus on it at the moment. But basically, this is the reality. Company accounts show 15 million out of the 23 million raised was spent on costs, with the company owned by the artist receiving 7.2 million. Who made money out of putting up the money, and Mr. Whitfield, whose hedge fund, and he made a quick 3 million on it. So Britain's charities now into an industry. That's how Common Purpose can operate, of course. We feel we simply cannot support this anymore, but our thoughts will be, of course, for the very brave men and women who've served Britain, paid the ultimate price, or suffered injuries. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. That ends the news today. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, perhaps you'd consider doing that. We can only do what we do with the support of our viewers and listeners. With your support, we will be back same time on Monday. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.